Okay, here we go again. All right, so on the screen, this will be on the screen for you. I said Good Shepherd. It wasn't Good Shepherd. It's Good Samaritan. Sorry, my bad. My bad. So, a man by the name of Muzaffar Sharif did an experiment called the Robber's Cave experiment. And I'm going to show you as soon as I get to... This is the Robber's Cave experiment.
Between 1949 and 1954, social psychologist Muzaffar Sharif and Carolyn Wood Sharif collaborated with graduate students to hold a series of experiments to test one of Dr. Sharif's ideas, known as realistic conflict theory. This having to do with intergroup conflict, stereotypes, and prejudices. The most famous and significant of his experiments took place in 1954 at Robbers Cave State Park in Oklahoma. Sharif's main idea was that conflict arises between groups when they're competing for limited resources. This hypothesis had important implications as the Second World War had recently ended. The experiments involved 22 children between the ages of 11 and 12. None of them knew each other previously, and all came from similar backgrounds: middle class, white, and Protestant. The experiment had 3 stages, the first being a bonding stage. Before the two groups were made aware of each other, they were encouraged to bond and create social norms by engaging in activities such as swimming and hiking. Here the groups took names, the Eagles and the Rattlers, and developed their own cultures and cultural norms. The next stage was the competition stage, lasting 4 to 6 days. In this stage, there was to be friction between the groups, and as such, a series of competitions were arranged. These competitions included baseball, tug of war, and touch football, among others. The winners would receive a trophy, medals, and pocket knives. There was no alternative prize for the losers. The Rattlers, who had developed a norm of toughness and aggression, became emphatically confident in their success. They put Rattlers' flags on the baseball field and made threats about bothering them. The researchers then manipulated situations where one group would gain at the cost of the other. What started as verbal aggression between the groups soon escalated further. After one of the baseball games, the Eagles burned the Rattlers' flag. The next day, the Rattlers raided the Eagles' cabin, flipping beds and stealing personal items. Soon, fistfights would break out, and the researchers had to physically separate the children. After the end of the conflict period, where it was announced that the Eagles were the winners, there was a reducing friction period. The groups were asked to characterize the other group, and it was found that there were profoundly negative characterizations, while holding their own group in high esteem. During this time, the two groups were brought together to engage in non-competitive activities. Sharif believed that simple contact between the groups would not reduce friction. Instead, there would need to be common, superordinate goals to accomplish. In one event, the boys were to watch a movie together, but had to chip in money of their own. They worked together to decide the splitting of the money. They also had to work to fix an issue with a water tank and the water supply at camp, which the researchers had arranged. Likewise, one of the trucks delivering food became stuck and had to be pulled out by the children working together. At this point, the kids had come together, no longer as enemies, but as allies with a common goal. Muzaffar and Carolyn Sharif had successfully demonstrated realistic conflict theory. Normal boys became their own cultures and showed that conflict for limited resources can lead to prejudiced attitudes and discriminatory behaviors. While simple coexistence did not eliminate these prejudices, working together towards something better for both groups did.
Okay, so that experiment was to show you realistic conflict theory. So in the end, how did they get the boys to come back together? They had, let me make this bigger. They had to work towards a superordinate goal, a goal that benefits all and requires the participation of all. So when you think of where we are right now, and you think of how people are, hoarding things and buying inordinate amounts of supplies that we have absolutely no reason to believe we're going to be out of, do you believe people are working to a superordinate goal? No, it's every man for himself. But at some point they'll have to. And so right now we're in the conflict stage, the realistic conflict stage, where people are kind of every man for himself. But at some point that will have to happen. But I want you to, the reason we're doing this chapter when we're doing it is because I want you to take advantage. You're seeing, I hope, a once in a lifetime event, and certainly once in my lifetime. And it gives you an opportunity to observe people in social situations using social psychological theories that you would not normally have. All right, so we covered social influences on communication, social influences on cognition. Now we're going to talk about social influences on feelings. All right, let me see if I can get this screen to come up. So social influences on feelings. On page 192, when social psychologists study and describe attitudes, they're describing the affective or feeling characteristics of social interactions. And I don't understand why these are not coming up. But I took pictures of the screen, and when they upload to my computer, I'll email them to you. Okay, so attitudes are our predispositions toward someone or something, feelings, value judgments, evaluations, opinions about life. So we've talked about many times, for example, we have different attitudes about Burger King than we do about Chick-fil-A. We have different attitudes about the beach than we do lakes, different attitudes about all kinds of things. So the social influences on our feelings. So if you live, for example, in New York City, you might make a value judgment or have opinions about the lives of people who live in the country. In the 2016 election, there was a lot of talk about how unrealistic it was to have somebody like Hillary Clinton or somebody like Donald Trump run for president of the United States, because neither one of them had any idea what it felt like to live in a small town or be from a rural area or even a suburb. Attitudes. Your attitudes are your predispositions towards people, things, life, whatever, right? Okay, so your book talks about... your book even mentions broccoli, so I want to show you a video that I think this was real time in my life. So you probably know who George W. Bush is, but you don't remember his dad. But this is when his dad was president. He didn't like broccoli.
I announced to the world about this time that I did not like broccoli. But I never liked broccoli. And now that I was president of the United States, I was never eating it again. It caused a huge stir, and I still hear about it today.
There are truckloads of broccoli at this very minute descending on Washington.
The donation and delivery to the White House were prompted by a statement recently made by President Bush that he disliked the vegetable.
My family is divided. I do not like broccoli, and I haven't liked it since I was a little kid, and my mother made me eat it. And I'm president of the United States, and I'm not going to eat any more broccoli. Now, for the broccoli vote out there, Barbara loves broccoli.
So I always loved George H.W. Bush, so I thought that was really funny, and I voted for him. I remember when that happened. So attitudes are comprised of three parts. There's a cognitive part, an emotional part, and a behavioral part. The cognitive part, let's make this big again. The cognitive part is your perceptions, beliefs, thoughts, and memories regarding an object. So if you went to the beach when you were little and you got a terrible sunburn and you got sand in your shorts and your mom made lunch but the sandwiches got sandy and it just made you never like the beach again, your attitude towards the beach is affected by your memory of the beach, right? The emotional component obviously is your feelings about the subject, and the behavioral component are your attitudes, your actions towards the subject. And it's interesting because this is a classic, less classic, nurture versus nature. How do we form our attitudes? Most psychologists agree that we form attitudes, it's by nurture, born with an attitude. So if you come from a family that hates broccoli, okay, like his wife liked it, so his kids might have had a different attitude. But if everybody in your family hates broccoli and they never cook broccoli, you're probably not going to like broccoli. Parents teach more than just facts. They teach attitudes. Unfortunately, parents teach their prejudices as well. So racism, was handed down for generations and generations all across the South. The concept of slavery is certainly not inborn. That was nurtured into people. One of the things that helps solidify your attitudes is called the mere exposure effect. You can see it on the board. Tendency to have a positive attitude towards those things which we are familiar with. The more you're exposed to something, the more positively you receive it. We joke about, like Chick-fil-A, everybody has a good attitude about Chick-fil-A, but we go to Chick-fil-A a lot. So the more you're exposed to it, the more you think positively about it. But there are other ways that influencers really affect this. So it can be affected by propaganda. It can be affected by advertising, for example. But let me talk about a way that it can be affected by propaganda. So when Adolf Hitler took over in Nazi Germany, he didn't just one day show up with brown shirts and swastikas, and it was incremental. So the more you got exposed to the Jews wearing the yellow stars, and the more you got exposed to the signs of Hitler everywhere, you just got used to it. A way that you can see a liberal agenda in America is television programming. Little ways. The first show I remember was a television show called Will and Grace, and he was a gay guy and she was a woman, and they were friends, and it was about their relationship and the troubles and issues of there was a sitcom. And Will was awesome, and he was sweet, and he was funny, and you never saw him do anything that made him gay. You didn't see any gay behaviors, initially, and so you got used to him and you liked him. And so they don't ever show the behaviors that people find distasteful from homosexuals. They don't show, so you're exposed to it. It's a mere exposure, and you're exposed to it over and over and over until you become desensitized to it, and you just accept it. Well, if all gay guys are like, well, then all gay guys are great, and why wouldn't I want them to get married, and why wouldn't I want them to adopt children, and what in the world could be wrong with that? And they're on my television, and I only go to church on Sunday, but I watch television every day. So, people, their attitudes are affected by what they're exposed to. Attitudes do influence behavior, but the truth is behavior actually influences attitude more. So going back to the television example, you watch television every day. You go to church on Sunday. Okay, so, or if you're in public school, you go to school every day, and every day you're exposed to an agenda that tells you that there's no God. You don't hear about God at school. You're not exposed to that. And you only hear about him on Sunday. Well, so where's your exposure? So your behavior, I'm in a place that doesn't revere the Lord. Your behavior affects your attitude, okay? Many of you, most of us did the Enneagram. And there's a priest by the name of Richard Rohr, who's a famous Enneagrammer. He does a lot of Enneagram psychology. And he has this statement, which I think is really cool. We do not think ourselves into new ways of living. We live ourselves into new ways of thinking. How I live will become the way I think is acceptable to live. So if you allow your values, if you allow the things of God to be very unimportant to you, if you allow education to be unimportant to you, or family, or treating people, as you become more like the world, you will begin to, you live more like the world, you begin to think more like the world. So it's garbage in, garbage out, what we're exposed to, how we live, the music we listen to, the television shows we watch, the movies that we watch. It does affect us, and it'll affect, eventually it'll affect our character. Let's see, what else? What else? Attitudes, bad attitudes. I need to move on to the next screen, so I have to erase this board. So I'll be back. I'll be back.